Hey, everybody. I just wanted to talk a little bit about standards. Um, there's just, they're interesting. They are interesting. Um, so basically, you may, well, all right, here's a good question to start with. When do you think um, education in the United States got standards? Like, are we talking like early 1900s, 30s, 40s, a few years ago? What you thinking? Well, they actually started in the 1980s. So when I was coming up through school, they were, well, they didn't really have standards at that quite yet. I mean, they were coming on board when I was in school, but at any rate, it was in the 80s. And the reason was that there was this study conducted by the federal government, and it was called A Nation at Risk. And basically, what the study showed was that the United States was falling way behind most other wealthy nations in terms of the quality of its education system. And for a long time, it had been among the best. So people were concerned. And there was this phrase that everyone was really into that was the rising tide of mediocrity. And how this would be problematic for the United States, which is true. I mean, an education system is like extremely foundational to the quality of a whole nation, right? So they decided that the answer was standards and tests. That if we state what people should know and then test a lot, that will improve education. You can probably see how neither of those things really improves education in any way. It's just people saying, here's what we're going to do. It was horrible. Um, the the standards and the testing have ended up eating loads of school days. The testing itself often takes quite a few days, but lots of schools have days, sometimes weeks of this massive test prep, which is highly inefficient. It doesn't follow the rules of making learning stick, so it often yields nothing. Like students spend all this time being just kind of thrown, all this stuff thrown at them fast, 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 fast. And they can't do anything with it. It doesn't stick. Um, you definitely don't want to be in an elementary school during testing because you'll see a lot of tears and students like getting so worked up that they're throwing up. It's just a really bad scene. I can't believe this is what we do. And of course, you've got certain types of people who may know very little about a subject, but they're good test takers. And so they seem to do well when they may not know much. And then you've got people who actually know a great deal, but are poor test takers. And so it's just kind of a mess all the way around. But the question is, has it worked? Like, is our education system better? Have we risen up through the ranks? Are things good? 40 years have passed, and the answer is no, we're not doing better. So that's where we're at. Yet we stick with it. So, what has worked? Well, there are plenty of other countries that we can look at who have risen up through the ranks, who in recent decades have actually done, gone from being more mediocre to actually really, really shining. And those countries tend to have, instead of the pages and pages of standards, they might have a single page of just kind of simple, broad standards. Yay. Um, in countries like Finland, they test very rarely. So the average student might take 1 to 2 tests, standardized tests, national tests in their whole P12 career. Yeah, 1 to 2 tests total. And when they do test, they just kind of randomly pick a random subset of students just to see how people are doing. The tests aren't about those students. tests. And in fact, I'm not sure the students are necessarily even told how they did. It's just, we need to get a feel for how people are doing. Let's have some students take some tests so we can kind of see where people are at. Of course, also what has made the best systems the best are that they tend to treat teachers and students really well. There's a lot of respect and autonomy and compassion. But something else I think that we need to realize is that testing is huge money. It makes a lot of people a lot of money. And like the really big testing companies give money to political platforms, and yeah. So that's probably one of the reasons they're still around. So in more recent years, there was this like new round, like we just need better standards, and they need to be, instead of state by state, they need to be national. So that was quite a dust up. They started with just 2 sets of standards, and really that's all that's ever come out of it. This was back in like 2010, 2009, 2010, kind of around that time. And so national standards were created in math and in English, only those 2 areas. And it was super weird because you would think if you were doing that, you would pull together experts from around the country. But it wasn't that. It was just like a handful of people doing each test, and no one really was sure who they were. It was super weird. And the movement was funded and pushed by Republicans, which is strange because Republicans tend to be state rights, and this was like, we're going to have national standards. So that was weird. But of course, since the Republicans were pushing it, the Democrats didn't like it. But it got adopted by a lot of states. And then when Obama came on, he supported it. And so because he supported it, then all of a sudden Republicans didn't like it and Democrats did, which just shows you that most things have nothing to do with this necessarily the value of what's being promoted, but just my team is promoting it. Makes me crazy. So at any rate, it's been a little bit of a mess. Interestingly, the math standards, I'm not really, math isn't my background, so it's hard for me to weigh in on the quality of them, but they got a lot of pushback. Whereas the English ones, which I can definitely weigh in on, are really quite good. In fact, they're the only standards that are used in Georgia that I think are actually good quality. And they're fascinating because they don't say like you have to teach these books or these facts or these words so much as more broad general things, which is nice. And when you look at them, you're like, yeah, students should be able to do these things. But most interestingly is they spiral, which means they're the same set of standards every year. But each year they get just a little bit like students should be able to do it at a higher level, which just makes a lot of sense. The worst standards are probably the history standards. I'm really sorry, all of you who teach history. They are just awful. They are basically a massive list of people and facts and dates that students are supposed to know. They don't really do a good job teaching things like how to think like a historian, how to consider like broad themes. Terrible, terrible standards. And there's way too many things. And so it's just like this race across time. And of course, as we know, that's going to yield in very little actually sticking, and it's not going to make many students become excited about the subject. So that's the story of where we're at in terms of standards. I'm going to have you look at your standards during this module. I'm sure a lot of you who are already teaching, obviously you've already seen your standards. If you haven't, I'll put a link in to where you can find them. And I will say this, well, I've just said that basically I'm not a fan of standards unless they're simple and broad. The idea that you would have goals for what you're teaching, goals for a whole course, objectives for each unit, outcomes that you want to see in each lesson, that in itself is fantastic. Fantastic. Because if you don't know where you're going and you're just kind of randomly teaching stuff, that, that doesn't lead anywhere good. We all need goals for anything we're doing, whether we're learning a musical instrument or we are learning to cook or a sport, an art form. It doesn't matter. It's important to think, all right, here's what I'm trying to get better at this. Here's what I'm trying to specifically work on right now. That part is great. All right, I'm going to stop talking now so that you all can get going and have a great time.